Managed migration. First and foremost, really pleased that the department significantly rewrote the regs, having read our contribution, SAC's contribution, etc. But still some nervousness, as you will be aware, about the lack of detail for how migration will happen, but acutely aware that the transitional payments for SDP are in there, so we don't want to lose those regs altogether. Can you talk to us about your plans as to how you will present those regs when they come to the House?
Obviously, I recognise the urgency of getting this done, the regulations and the debates. And, yeah, we're not going to be debating them before Christmas. Thank you. Yeah, indeed. I take very seriously the letter that I've had from the Chairman and from Margaret Greenwood about it. And I will be bringing forward proposals in January that will address some of the concerns that you've raised. Now, I recognise you'd like to draw me much more on that. I haven't yet been able to get cross-government support for the proposals that I want to do. So all I can say at this moment is that I want to make sure that we're fully prepared. I acknowledge the proposals you've made in your letter, and I will come back as early as possible in January to address them. I particularly know that I need to do that just as soon as possible to make sure that we get the severe disability premium in place as soon as possible.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Can I just say, it'd be so helpful for not just Parliament, but the public, if we had ministers like that give an answer like that, who don't bullshit when they haven't actually. No, literally, we now know where we are on that.
It's a marvellous
thing,
and
it's a very, very honest answer that you haven't got agreement, you're seeking agreement, and you'll bring forward your proposals after Christmas. And I only comment because it's so unusual.
Right, okay.
To actually hear these.
I'll try to continue to earn your goodwill for the session.
Can I go on?
I'd say it's worth having. Yes, I'm fine, thank you.
Neil?
With an absence of bullshit, Chair, since as used the term. Will we still have a debate in the Commons when plans do get finalised?
Probably. It depends on what type of parliamentary action there is as a result, whether it's an affirmative or negative action. But I recognise your concern on it.
And you've been very clear that you want claimants to get their entitlements in good time. Are you agreeing that waiting 5 weeks is too long?
Waiting 5 weeks without getting an advance is too long. I think that the advance payments have been increasingly successful, which is good. We have a number of other proposals, which I'm sure you're aware of, to help people with that 5 week otherwise wait that they have. For instance, the legacy benefits being paid after 2 weeks to ensure that they can have some money within that 5 weeks. I think that the advance payments being paid over 12 months is helpful so that people can gently pay it back. I think that we can do more to communicate that it's an advance payment, not a loan. It is a distinction. You know, if this money is coming in, people are entitled to it. It's not a loan in the same way that people are quite rightly nervous of taking on. What? It is. Well, I think that I would make the distinction between a loan being against something that you don't necessarily know the money you're going to get in from. An advance
payment. You pay it back, isn't it?
What?
You do pay it back.
If you get a loan, you pay it back, isn't it?
Yeah, but
the idea is not a loan. Let's not.
Okay.
You pay it back. So what is no interest?
You pay no interest, and it's deducted against money that's going to be paid to you.
So let's be clear. We know that universal credit is causing debt and arrears, and we know it has driven thousands of people into incentivizing destitution and thousands of people into food banks. And if you dispute that, talk to Trust for Trust and the Independent Food Aid Network. We know that is happening. The solution to debt and arrears is not more debt, is it?
People arrive on universal credit quite often with substantial debt. Before addressing your question, can I just point out that universal credit is an improvement on legacy benefits, and there have been errors and difficulties with legacy benefits, some of which come into universal credit with people arriving with substantial debt. I do think that there were early problems with universal credit about payment, and having to wait 5 weeks without getting a payment up front has been hard for people, and sometimes there's been a delay in even after the 5 weeks, which meant that it was hard for people. So one of the things we're pressing down on is making sure that that payment after 5 weeks comes in on time, and as I said earlier, that's now at 85%, and allowing people to have access to the money.
This idea that people are in debt, look, Southwark was one of the early adopters. The average council tenant is about £8 in credit on housing benefit. The average council tenant on universal credit is £1,000 in arrears. That's the averages.
So we've made changes on housing benefit.
Housing associations in the same position, actually, where they're more in credit in their accounts. So this idea that people are arriving in a lot of debt is not backed up by a lot of the evidence. So if you could supply where your evidence is coming from to try and justify that, I would welcome seeing it. I'm sure the rest of the committee will.
On housing benefit, of course, under a former Secretary of State, a change was made so that people could have another 2 weeks of their housing benefit within that 5 weeks, specifically to protect people in terms of their housing payments.
Which was introduced in April. And that's why, and as the NAO in their report in June reflected, it was too early at that point to see the impact of that on things like housing arrears, but we'd expect to see that tracking through. It's 2 weeks of exit.
But other than the 5, you're simply saying that advances and more debt is a solution. You're not looking to change fundamentally that 5-week waiting period. You're not looking at roll-ons or run-ons of other support at all. Anything different to what's going on now?
Secretary of State said, Mr. Coyle, the budget announced that there will be a run-on of legacy benefits. Those who were on legacy benefits with DWP will see a 2-week run-on, and that will be introduced from July 2020. And so,
but you're not looking to reduce that 5-week wait.
Well, the 5-week. So we are not looking to change the monthly assessment process, because that is a key part of universal credit, that we assess people's incomes.
It's driven people into food banks and into debt at the start of a universal credit claim. And you're not looking to change that fundamentally.
I wonder whether you've quite understood the point that the Prime Secretary just made, which is that 2 weeks of legacy payment is going to be paid during that 5 weeks. So after 2 weeks... and
3 weeks. No, because then 3 weeks later you get a full monthly entitlement. And at that point,
and in the 3 weeks, what do you get?
Well, you're living on the 2 weeks that you had paid before.
For 5 weeks?
No, because you get the first. It's like the continuation of the rhythm of your legacy benefits.
So your expectation is, with those run-ons, food bank demand and the 50,000 people who were turning up at Citizens Advice every quarter, that demand outside the system, because you were saying the system was coping, I would suggest that the system is only coping with a massive army of volunteers in food banks and what is. You're saying that will reduce?
Well, I think there are two things to that. I mean, one is, and as we said at the time the NEO produced their report, I mean, usage of food banks relates to a whole range of different factors. And the time
credit and no recourse to public funds. That is what food banks have said. It's a big factor.
Of course.
Yeah.
But my point is that at the moment, if you're on legacy benefit, you're paid every 2 weeks. So under this announcement that was made in the budget, you're paid every 2 weeks, and then you've started your universal credit claim. You get the next 2 weeks, and then 3 weeks later you get... As I say, the usage of food banks is down to a whole range of different factors, and time I've spent in food banks have made that clear to me.
You see rolls out in a town, food bank usage
which
goes
is
up.
why we need to do better with both our advance payments and the legacy payments being paid for 2 weeks, and also the rent. I mean, former Secretary of States have addressed some of this. I do acknowledge the issue of food banks, and I don't want people to have to go to food banks. As I said, in Hastings we had a rise in food banks when UC was rolled out, and I have been there many times to talk to them about the consequences and what we can do to help. We must acknowledge too is the fact that it used to be that job centres would not give you information about food banks, and now many of us help people access food banks if that is what they need. I still don't want people to use food banks, but they have become part of the norm in terms of support for people who do need them.
Yeah, but I mean, there are two ways, aren't there, to prevent hunger, destitution, which occurs under the present system. One is to run on historic benefits for the 5 weeks or to whenever they pick up their universal credit payment. Or the alternative is the one that I've discussed with you, which is establishing a citizens' bank which lends people free of interest the monies so that there is no gap in income, and they have a huge period of time, thanks to the workings of your department, in paying it back. But nobody has put forward any other solution which doesn't risk people ending up at food banks.
Or make your advance payment, which is your best guess at your monthly payment, what it will be, make that your first payment. The fact that so many, 60% of people need advance payments. Now we're talking about 2 weeks of roll-on. They're all sticky plasters on top of the fact that the 5-week wait is a fundamental design flaw. Make that first advance payment the best guess of a payment and balance it out at the end of the month.
That's an interesting proposal. Lots of people have come to me with different proposals for getting money into people's hands earlier, and I will consider
3 proposals and discuss across government whether we can get support for it.
There are sort of financial consequences to some of these suggestions.
Yeah.
The principle, though, just to bear in mind about having the first payment after 5 weeks, is that at the centre of universal credit is a system which engages in real time with the payments being made to you through HMRC. So obviously you have to wait to get that information, but Ms Allen's suggestion, I've had several people bring to me as well, but as I say, there are financial consequences to it.
Derek, before we go
sorry to extend this a bit further, but I do want to understand exactly what we're talking about. Listening to what I've just heard, it actually sounds like there's a 1 week wait. So someone receives their money, 2 weeks later they receive their money on the traditional payment benefits, and then under the system you're going to introduce 2 weeks later, once they've gone to universal credit, they'll have the 2 weeks later run-on of the benefits.
4 weeks?
No, sorry, the Permanent Secretary said that there would be, from July of the year after next, that the run-on would be another 2 weeks into the 5 weeks.
Yes, that's correct, but they get 4 weeks payment at the end of that. They get the monthly payment, so they've had 2 weeks extra in order to adjust to the new system.
Sorry, Chairman, can I finish?
Do it.
No, so at the moment it's every 2 weeks, okay? Every 2 weeks that they're...
It's paid every 2 weeks, yeah.
So 2 weeks. And then they go on to universal credit, where it could be the 5 weeks, but they'll get their 2 weeks after as normal. And then... So actually then they'll be waiting 3 weeks, but in fact they would have just received the money for 2 weeks, so it would have taken them to the 2 weeks. So the time period where they actually won't receive any money will be 1 week, won't it?
That's correct.
Yeah.
But I think that needs to be made clear, because I talked about...
then get 4 weeks, so they've had 6 weeks money in the first month.
Yes.
Very clear, because the stress and anxiety which we talked about is often not knowing what to expect. And it's
I completely agree. And that of course, is very much part of the legacy system, where people had no idea how much money they'd be getting at the end of the month. And part of the benefit of universal credit is there will be clarity on that.
Really? You play hoops as a Cooper in it. All right, come on. It's very good.
Overpaid and they had to have it clawed back.
All right, Ruth.
Something to look at.
Ruth, to you.
Okay, that was actually because the amount that you could be paid extra in a year was reduced from £5,000 to £1,000. That's in tax credits, but that is another argument for another day.